Ahoy! Today we're talking about some really crazy items coming into Smite. And just to put it in perspective, yesterday we talked about an item that deals 20% maximum health damage as physical damage. It's crazier than that. That's how far we're going. All of this has been datamined by Daredust and is subject to change. Some of the item names are not final either. As we have a lot to go through, let's get started right away. First item that we have today is Bumbus Dagger. This still has 50 health and 50 mana as before, but there are some changes to the specific values. Your basic attacks still deal 15 extra true damage, but your abilities now deal 25% damage versus jungle camps, previously it was 15%. When a jungle monster is killed, you will be healed for 10% of the monster's health, restore 25 mana, and given an additional 4 gold. This can be upgraded at level 20. What's important here is previously this item had a restriction that would only allow the closest ally in range with Bumbas Mask to get the health back and everything, which basically prevents Bumbas stacking across the entire team. This restriction is now lifted. That may mean that Bumbas now has a higher price point, which would be unfortunate because the stats are relatively low compared to other starters, so it wouldn't really compete all too well. Or it could mean that you can only build one starter from now on, which would surprise me considering it seems like they are really pushing the old variations of starters and the whole appeal of them was that you could build multiple of them. Maybe HiRez is also confident that through other item changes or through jungle changes, other roles will just opt into other items that are better for them. We will find out. The upgraded version also got a change. Bumbas Spear now comes with 50 physical power and 75 magical power. In addition, it keeps the 200 mana and 200 health. The passive is also slightly changed. Your basic attacks deal 30 true damage and your abilities deal plus 30% damage against jungle camps, structures, and jungle bosses. When any of these die, you're healed for 10% of their health, restore 10% of your mana, and are given 10 gold. Again, this is very interesting, especially against objectives or structures. Getting 10% of their health can be quite a lot. At the same time, it's a little bit of a weird late game item. It has an interesting mix of stats, but this is not exactly the passive I would be after most of the time. Then again, it could be very effective for objective secure, and that could be its selling point as well. Kind of like Hand of the Gods used to be upgraded to secure objectives over the stun variation of it, because that just happened to have more value, at least in competitive, whereas the stun variation Fist of the Gods was often preferred in non-competitive games, especially in casual games as well. And speaking of stuns, we also still have the second version, now called Bombast Hammer, which comes with 200 health, 200 mana, 10% cooldown reduction, and the passive is your next basic attack that hits an enemy god will stun them for 1 second. This can only occur once every 45 seconds. Compared to the first version, the stun here was reduced by half a second, which sounds little but is actually pretty significant when it comes to hard CC. Given that the item doesn't come with any additional power or other perks that up its damage, it's going to be an interesting niche. Maybe this will be something that a lot of assassins will build, or maybe this will be something that is preferred by tankier junglers for late game setup as well. Think for example Athena jungle, who will then have 2 CCs. I know that the initial idea was that it has ridiculous setup for someone like Arachne, who can then go into her own stun with some diminishing returns and can get a lot of damage on the enemies off. But again, it doesn't come with any damage stats in order to really support that, so you have to make a sacrifice in a way. You get some survivability of course, but you're not getting much damage in return for that stun, so you really have to make a lot of use of it. And then maybe if you have to sacrifice another slot for a defensive item, you just lose a fair amount of damage. So while I initially thought this was the most OP item of the bunch, I am not so sure anymore. 20% maximum health in an instant damage thing, for example, seems to be able to compete with that, depending on what god you're playing, how much pen you have and everything of course. This is a little bit less conditional, so it's more flexible, but I wouldn't say it's the only choice. The weird thing is that the alternative with Bumbas Spear is just a little bit odd in my opinion, but we'll see how that develops. And that brings us to mage items. First one is Sands of Time. Now with 25 magical power, this actually got a nerf from 40. 5 MP5, 10% cooldown reduction, and this item grants 2 MP5 per 10% of your missing mana. Very simple, very straightforward. Not too much to say about that. The second item here is now Pendulum of Ages. This provides 70 magical power, 5 MP5, 10% cooldown reduction, and the passive. This item grants 4 MP5 instead of previously 2 per 10% of your missing mana. This item grants 8 magical power per 10% of your available mana. The base stats on this look relatively low, but at full mana this item comes with 150 magical power and 10% cooldown reduction. I think this is especially interesting for builds that focused almost purely on power. If you get this, then Book of Thoth for very high power and high mana, so you don't really run out, and then Rod of Tahuti also with a lot of MP5 and a lot of power, then you just have a massive amount of upfront power that you can work with, and maybe that'll just invite a completely different meta, just shift away from pen items or limited pen in order to just get a lot of power so that any percentage power increase you get after that scales higher. The alternative, aptly named the alternate timeline, comes with a little bit more upfront power, and that is 100 magical power. In addition, it has 15 MP5, a fair bit more, and also 10% cooldown reduction. When you would die, you instead find a timeline where you're still alive, becoming CC immune, damage immune, and unable to act. After 1.25 seconds, you are restored to 33% health and mana and can act again. This can only occur once every 6 minutes. Now this one is crazy. I think I would rather have this effect over a little bit more power, because effectively that makes you have so much more potential in a team fight. And it's interesting in many ways. If you compare this to other abilities like Capri ultimate, like Chronos ultimate, or like Persephone's passive, they all actually end up having some sort of condition tied to them. With Chronos you have to ult in time, with Capri the target has to die in time, with Persephone you stay alive for a while but you're actually still dead afterwards, you still count as a kill. With the alternate timeline, none of that applies, you just straight up revive. It doesn't matter if you are CC'd when you die, it doesn't matter if you get executed, as far as we can tell from this, you will just revive. And I think that's an incredibly strong and scary mechanic, especially on characters that already have some sort of self-revive mechanic of some kind built into their kits. This mechanic is not unheard of. League of Legends has a similar item with Guardian Angel, but I would find it very, very hard to get a feel for how this will be in Smite, because Smite is usually more fast-paced in combat, and a death makes a massive difference in a fight right away. And so a revive is huge, especially if you have some time in between where you are damage immune. Counterplaying this will likely revolve a lot around the cooldown, and it makes me feel like 6 seconds is almost too short. It is very long by Smite standards for sure, but I feel like this might almost need around 10 seconds so that you can definitely get very punished for losing this effect. But those are obviously easy tweaks to be made, so I find it very interesting that they are experimenting with this mechanic in the first place. Next up, we have the Vampiric Shroud tree. I've already discussed this one in detail and compared this to the original starter items from way back in the day in my first video about the new starter items. If you haven't seen that yet, I will link that here or at the end of the video so you can check that out in more detail. All of the changes in this tree are relatively minor, they just affect the power and a little bit of the health, so I'm not going to go through the changed things, but rather just the stats we have now. Vampiric Shroud comes with 40 magical power, 50 health, and 10 physical protection. I made a little bit of a mistake the first time I read this one, because it's actually not damaging an enemy, it's damaging any enemies with an ability, gives you bonus 6 health and mana. Can only trigger once per target per ability. This means it can still trigger 6 times on a whole wave if you hit the whole wave, and especially with lower cooldown guards this could be very interesting. It gets more interesting when we're looking at the upgraded version. This is Blood-Soaked Shroud, which comes with 95 magical power, 200 health, and 40 physical protection. Damaging any enemies with an ability gives you bonus 12 health and 6 mana. Additionally, gain 1% magical lifesteal for 6 seconds. Can only trigger once per target per ability. I initially thought that this was way weaker than Death Toll because of the flat value, but realizing that you can actually proc on a whole wave makes this a lot more interesting. At that point, we're talking about 72 healing per ability. The question is if that's really worth it late game compared to some of the other options, especially since clearing lanes is not really your priority. While the lifesteal doesn't seem to have any stacking restrictions, 1% doesn't sound exactly overwhelming. Even if you hit a wave with 2 abilities, that's 12% at the end of it. Not super crazy. The other option is Sacrificial Shroud, 80 magical power, 100 health and 40 physical protection. Comes with 15% magical lifesteal built in. The passive here is your abilities deal 10% more damage but cost 5% of your maximum health. Already said last time, I find this a very interesting interaction, especially now with a little bit more power, makes the item a little bit more beneficial overall, though I am not sure if it's going to compete with the other higher power options. I feel like this might still need some more buffs, but the percentage increases are usually preferable, they work in interesting ways sometimes. So I actually meant for this video to be the last one of the item discussions, but there is still so much to talk about on the other items and there was so much to talk about with this ones. So I'm actually going to make another cut at this point and we'll talk about the next one very soon. So at this point, if you want to get updated of the video discussing the other items that are currently being tested, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell if you haven't yet, so that you get a notification. Other than that, I thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you for the next one soon. Duke Sloth, out.